The rain was a relentless drumbeat against the windshield of Mark's old pickup truck, the kind of downpour that felt like the sky itself was angry. He squinted through the streaky glass, the wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. Beside him, a well-worn car seat sat empty, a silent reminder of the reason he was out on a night like this: to pick up a double shift at the diner. Every extra dollar was for Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, a bright-eyed kid who deserved more than a life of scraped-together meals and hand-me-down clothes. Mark, a man in his late 30s, had the broad shoulders and calloused hands of a former construction worker. A life he'd left behind after a tragic accident took his wife and left him as Lily's sole provider. He'd traded the hard hats for an apron, finding a quiet stability in the rhythm of flipping burgers and pouring coffee. It was an honest living, but it was a battle every single day. He was on the old coastal highway, a route he usually avoided, but the main road was flooded. The storm had been brewing for days, a slow, menacing build-up that had finally broken. The wind howled, a mournful sound that shook the truck. As he approached the old Pine Creek Bridge, a structure that had seen better days, he saw it. Flashing lights in the distance, a small crowd of people huddled under umbrellas, and the frantic gestures of a police officer. He slowed to a crawl, his heart thudding with a sense of dread. The bridge ahead was a mess. A section had buckled, a jagged, gaping hole where the road used to be. A car was dangling precariously over the edge, its headlights piercing the dark, churning water below. The officer, a young woman with a panicked expression, was shouting into a radio. "There's someone in the car!" a man yelled from the crowd. "A woman! She's still inside!" Mark didn't think. He saw the car. He saw the danger, and a primal instinct took over. This wasn't about heroism. It was about the cold fear of a life lost, the kind of finality he knew all too well. He pulled his truck to the side, grabbed the heavy rope he kept in the back for emergencies, and sprinted towards the officer. "I'm a former construction worker," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I know this bridge. I can get to her." The officer hesitated for a moment, her eyes full of doubt, but the frantic screams from the car, now tilting even more, made her decision for her. "Be careful," she warned. "The structure is unstable." Mark tied one end of the rope to a rusted guardrail, testing its strength with all his weight. The wind whipped at his face, and the rain made the concrete slick. He moved with a practiced, deliberate grace, a dance with disaster he'd learned on scaffolding high above the city. He slid along the edge, his boots finding purchase on the broken steel rebar and shattered concrete. The car, a sleek, expensive-looking sedan, was teetering. He reached the vehicle, its front end inches from a 1,000-foot drop into the raging river. Inside, a woman was struggling against a seatbelt, her face a mask of terror. A white veil and a few scattered roses on the dashboard told him she was a bride. Her hands were shaking as she tried to unbuckle the belt, but it was jammed. "Don't move!" Mark shouted over the storm. "I'm going to get you out!" He grabbed a crowbar from his belt, another leftover from his old life, and wedged it into the car door. With a groan of metal and a sudden lurch, he pried the door open. The car shifted, the tires slipping further. The woman screamed. "Now!" he ordered, his voice raw with urgency. "Get out! Now!" She scrambled out, her beautiful white dress torn and mud-splattered. She stumbled, and Mark caught her, pulling her close as the car gave a final, sickening shriek of metal and plunged into the abyss below. The shockwave of the impact sent a spray of water high into the air, soaking them both. He didn't let go of her until they were on solid ground, the crowd cheering and the officer running to check on them. The bride was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the raw terror of her brush with death. She looked at him, her eyes wide and full of a profound gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You saved me." Mark just nodded, his own heart still hammering in his chest. He was soaked, exhausted, and knew he'd be late for his shift. But as he looked at the woman, now a survivor instead of a victim, a small, quiet sense of pride settled in his weary soul. He had risked his life for a stranger, and in that moment he felt a flicker of the man he used to be, a man who built things, not just for a living, but for a future. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the town, but the devastation was evident everywhere. Fallen trees, flooded streets, and the gaping moor where the Pine Creek Bridge used to be. Mark was in the diner wiping down tables, his mind still replaying the events of the previous night. He had come home late, smelling of rain and mud, and had just a few hours of fitful sleep before Lily's cheerful voice woke him. She had listened to his story, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, calling him a superhero. It was a title he found hard to accept. He was just a single dad, a man trying to make ends meet. As he poured a cup of coffee for a regular, a well-dressed woman walked in. She was older, with a kind but serious face, and she scanned the diner with an air of purpose. She approached Mark, a small smile on her face. "Mark?" she asked. He nodded, a sense of unease settling in. "That's me." "My name is Helen Vance. I'm the family attorney for the woman you rescued last night," she said, her voice low. "Her name is Olivia Vance." Mark's eyebrows shot up. "The bride? Is she okay?" "She's shaken, but she's fine. Thanks to you," Helen replied, her eyes filled with a genuine warmth. "We've been looking for you. She wants to thank you properly." Before Mark could respond, Helen held up a hand. "Let me be frank. Olivia is not just a woman who was getting married. She's Olivia Vance Harding." Mark stared at her, the name clicking into place. Vance Harding, the tech giant. The news had been full of stories about the reclusive young billionaire who had recently taken over the company after her father's death. She was rarely seen in public, and for the past 2 weeks her disappearance had been a major story, with tabloids speculating everything from a private honeymoon to a hostile takeover. He felt a wave of dizziness. He had pulled a billionaire heiress from a collapsing bridge. Helen continued. "She's been through a lot. The past few weeks have been a nightmare. She was on her way to elope, trying to escape a lot of corporate pressure and a very difficult personal situation. The man she was marrying was not what he seemed." A few days later, Mark received a call. It was a private number, but the voice on the other end was familiar. "Mark, it's Olivia." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this. I wanted to talk to you in person." She asked him to meet her at a small, discreet cafe on the edge of town, a place no one would recognize. He arrived to find her sitting at a secluded table, her back to the door. She was dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, a world away from the torn wedding dress he'd last seen her in. She was more beautiful up close, with a quiet strength that emanated from her. "Mark, thank you," she said, her voice stronger this time, the gratitude more profound. "For everything. You didn't just save my life, you gave me a second chance." She explained the truth. Her fiancé, a man named Gavin, had been manipulating her, isolating her from her family and board members to seize control of the company. The disappearance was her desperate last-ditch attempt to escape him and get her life back. The elopement was a ruse, a way to disappear and regroup. The bridge collapse was an accident, a stroke of terrible luck that ironically saved her from a much worse fate. Mark listened, his mind reeling. He felt a mix of pity and admiration. This woman, who had everything, was just as vulnerable and scared as anyone else. Olivia, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes, offered him a solution. She had heard about his daughter Lily and the challenges he faced as a single father. "My foundation, the one my father started, is focused on helping people who have faced loss and are trying to rebuild their lives. I've heard your story, and I want to help you." She offered him a job, a position in her company's new urban renewal project, using his construction expertise. The pay was generous, the hours were stable, and most importantly, it came with health insurance and a solid future for Lily. It was an offer that would change everything. Mark was speechless. This was a lifeline he never thought he'd be thrown. He had a million questions, but all he could manage was a single heartfelt, "Why me?" Olivia smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Because you're a good man, Mark. You're a builder. You build bridges, not just out of steel and concrete, but between people. And you reminded me that there are still good people in the world." 6 months later, the landscape of their lives had completely transformed. The old, broken-down diner was a distant memory. Mark was now a foreman on a massive project, overseeing the construction of a new community center in a once-neglected part of the city. He wore a hard hat again, but this time it felt different. It felt like a symbol of hope, a future being built brick by brick. His hands, once calloused from flipping burgers, were now calloused from the satisfying work of construction. The new bridge, a state-of-the-art marvel of engineering, was also well underway, a stark contrast to the decrepit one that had nearly taken Olivia's life. He would often drive by the site, a wave of reflection washing over him. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a testament to resilience, a physical manifestation of the new life he and Olivia had built. Lily was thriving. She was in a new school, making friends, her laughter echoing through their new, comfortable apartment. She no longer had to worry about what she would wear or if they could afford a trip to the zoo. She had a father who was present, confident, and no longer haunted by the past. Mark saw his wife's face in Lily's smile, and for the first time in years, the pain of her loss was replaced by the joy of building a new, better future for their daughter. Olivia and Mark had developed an unexpected but profound friendship. She wasn't the distant, mysterious billionaire the tabloids had painted her to be. She was just Olivia, a woman who had been through a harrowing ordeal and was now navigating her own new life with a quiet determination. Gavin, her former fiancé, had been exposed and was facing legal consequences. Her company, once a battlefield of corporate intrigue, was now a place she was proud to lead, with a renewed focus on social responsibility. They would meet for coffee sometimes, not in a secluded cafe, but in public, laughing and talking about their lives. The fear that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. She often came to the construction site, watching Mark work, a silent understanding passing between them. One afternoon, as the sun set over the half-finished community center, Olivia stood with Mark, watching the last of the crews pack up for the day. The air was filled with the sounds of hammers and the promise of a better tomorrow. "I still can't believe it," she said softly. "All of this. It all started on a bridge, in a storm." Mark looked at her, his face etched with a peaceful smile. "Some bridges need to fall down for new ones to be built." He took a deep breath, the smell of fresh concrete and pine wood filling his lungs. "You know, the old me, he would have been terrified to talk to someone like you." Olivia laughed gently. "And the old me, I would never have let anyone get this close." He looked at her, and the words, unspoken but hanging in the air, were about more than just gratitude. They were about shared trauma, mutual respect, and the quiet, undeniable bond that had been forged in the most chaotic of circumstances. They were two people from completely different worlds, brought together by fate and an act of simple human kindness. Mark's life was no longer defined by tragedy, but by resilience. He was a hero not because he pulled a billionaire from a bridge, but because he had the courage to rebuild his own life from the ground up, one day at a time, for the most important person in his world. And in Olivia, he found a friend, a partner in rebuilding, and a living reminder that even in the darkest of storms, there is always hope for a new beginning.